Hello everyone. Before the video begins, I'd like to let you know about my Patreon account. All I ask is $1 a month and you'll receive access to all horror stories in MP3 format, including all of the stories in this video. Thank you for your support, and without further ado, let's get creepy. This happened when I was about 18 years old. I was big into running back then and lived in a town that was a suburb but had big swaths of farmland, as in smallish tomato and strawberry fields, not huge never-ending wheat fields. I preferred running on the dirt at the edges of these fields because it was a lot easier on my legs than running long distances on concrete or asphalt, and I was usually training for half marathons, 13.1 miles for those who aren't insane enough to think running is fun. This particular day, I was planning to run an easy 6 miles. I told my mom, and she suggested I do a loop and meet them at the dog park about 3 miles from our house as my halfway point. This is pre-cell phone era, but being careful, I took a walkie-talkie my dad always used, and my mom took the other one. Now, the walkie-talkie had a range longer than the ones my brothers and I played around with when we were younger, but it definitely did not work 3 miles away, and I honestly had no idea what its exact range was. So I take off on my run. I'm planning to go on the sidewalk for a little bit until I get to the fields. I think it was lettuce or something then, but short small plants. I'm running in the dirt with the road a few yards to my left. I have to run south and then turn right into a slightly smaller, less traveled road to get to the dog park. As I'm running on the first dirt part, my parents drive by, and being dorks, they honk and wave and yell at me. I wave and then soon after make my turn onto the smaller road. This one road is me on a flat dirt small drainage ditch, forever of lettuce field, then a wall that is the backyard of some houses. I start noticing how quiet the street is and how few cars are passing me. Then, I randomly start thinking to myself, if someone tried to do something, I could run to those houses. No, they're far away. I'd never make it. Then, I hear a car, but this one doesn't pass me like all the others. I hear it slow down, so that it's behind me. My senses go super alert, and I immediately realize what a dumbass I was to pick this route because I'm stuck out here with no one to help me and nowhere to hide. The car starts speeding up enough so that it's next to me, and I glance over to see a man. Middle-aged, white, dark hair. Totally normal looking, but I get a chill down my spine immediately. He sort of leans over into the passenger seat and says in a super sweet voice, "Hi, where are you going? Do you need a ride?" I'm scared, and I realize that it's no good. Admittedly, nothing has happened yet, and he could be totally innocently just wanting to chat, but my intuition is in overdrive telling me I'm not safe. I hop over the ditch, thinking at least that will make it harder for his car to follow me if I need to take off across the field to try and make it to those houses in the distance. This pisses him off. He guns it and gets closer to the ditch and in front of where I am, and then he says in a voice I can only describe as bone-chillingly evil,
"You know, you shouldn't be out here all alone. Something horrible could happen to you out here, and no one would ever know where to find you."
He's put his car in park and is taking off his seatbelt when I remember the walkie-talkie. The piece of crap is all static because I'm too far away, so I immediately turn down the volume and say loudly, "Hey Dad, yeah, I see your car. I'm over here by the red Buick. Do you see me?" I fake wave to no one. There was no car coming from the direction my parents were, and when I had started talking, there was no one behind us either. But by the grace of the universe, at that exact moment, a car turned onto the road. The guy saw it, looked at me, and sped off so fast he left skid marks. I've never run faster in my life, and I was looking behind me every few seconds and thought he'd be waiting for me at every intersection I had to cross. I was shaking and was so scared and relieved when I got to that goddamn dog park. I told my parents everything, and my mom called the cops. They took a statement, but said it would just help if something actually happened to someone else. The weird part was, I was having trouble getting my story out. I was so upset, and before I gave a description of the car, the cop asked, "Was it a red Buick?" He wouldn't tell us why, but that just added to my feeling that I had narrowly escaped something awful. I've been working in the sewer business for a while. As you would expect, I've seen some disgusting stuff, seeing as most of my jobs are unclogging people's septic tanks. I've seen hair clogs the size of a soccer ball, clumps of tampons, and of course a handful of goldfish. Quick public service announcement to parents: don't flush your fish, just bury it or feed it to the birds. It'll save you a lot of money and time in the future. Those are the kinds of things I can forget about, nothing special. It's the things that have no explanation that stick with you. There is one that sticks with me the most. I was running a camera down someone's pipes when I saw it the first time. The pipes are no more than 6 to 8 inches in diameter. This thing was in one of the bigger pipes, and when I saw it, it had its back to me. At first, I assumed it was a rat. Those are pretty common, and I saw a tail, so I nudged it with the camera to try and get it to run away. It didn't move. I nudged it again and again, but it wasn't budging. My thought now was that I had a dead rat. Again, not uncommon, but it was still in the way. With one final nudge, something yanked the rat from my view and took off down the pipes. I remember getting so caught off guard I actually screamed and fell back on my ass right on the client's lawn. Lucky for me, they were inside, so no one was around to see me make a fool of myself. I knew, however, that what I saw wasn't normal. There should be nothing much bigger than a rat down there. I looked back over the camera footage and played it back, frame by frame. What I saw still scares me to this day. From the left side of the pipe, a small, bony hand shot out and snatched up the rat and then ran off down the tunnel, only to disappear out of view of the camera. From what I could tell, it was a quadruped, but given the size of its legs, it would have no use being bipedal. I told the client that they had a small infestation, and then about the packages we offered. They agreed to go with one, and I came out the next week to try and take care of the issue. I did end up pulling out about 15 rats, but I never found the thing that I saw on the camera. That was about 3 years ago, and I've never seen anything like it since then. I hope I never do. My name was Mark Stravinsky. As you can tell by the title of this post, I'm a killer, a criminal, and you probably think I'm a monster. I wouldn't argue with you. I've done terrible things to good people. I've helped evil people with their agendas, and I've ruined thousands of lives by doing so. Today, I'm coming clean. I'm admitting to the big crimes, murders, and conspiracies I've been involved in. I can't cover everything, as the entire list is quite extensive, and honestly, I probably don't remember all of it anymore. I've been doing this for quite a long time. Long enough to know that the bad guys get away with pure, unadulterated evil. I feel the need to issue a warning before I get into the details. What I'm about to tell you will not make you a happier person or make your life any better. You'll probably be labeled a conspiracy theorist nutjob if you ever talk about these things outside in the real world, but they need to be known. I don't give a fuck whether you believe me or not. These are things that I did, things that I saw. It's easy for you to just hear my story and outright deny it, but I can't just do that. I can't just click my fingers and make the last 20 years of my life disappear. With all that said, let's begin with who I was before I became an evil henchman. I had a fairly decent upbringing, but I was a failure in high school. I was one of those kids who were just passed along, putting in just enough work not to fail. My parents coddled me, and I became weak, lazy, and spoiled as a result. At 18 years old, I had no work ethic, no motivation, and no direction. Most of my time was spent hanging out with my friends, smoking weed, or watching TV. When I graduated, my parents wanted me to start thinking about my future seriously and threatened to kick me out if I didn't change. I didn't though, and the free ride only lasted a few months, most of it being spent fighting with my asshole parents. When they kicked me out, I realized how nice I had it there and regretted everything I'd done within just a few days. Sleeping on concrete can have a really sobering effect. My parents tried to contact me a few times after they learned that I was homeless, but I was done with them. They were dead to me. After applying to dozens of jobs throughout the city, I realized that nobody wanted to hire a hobo, so I did what any smart homeless person does. I enlisted in the military. I became an infantryman, and it looked like I had finally found a place I belonged. When I went to basic, I was a weak, lazy piece of shit, but by the end, I was a highly motivated badass. I honestly have no clue what changed me, but I graduated at the top of my class. I was like this entirely different person in just a few weeks. Shortly after that, I became an asset for the US military on the battlefield. I had the most confirmed kills in my company, and I quickly climbed the ranks. I was really surprised to learn I had a natural act for warfare. I remember one of the officers saying to me, "Son, a soldier like you comes along once in 100 years." I was ecstatic. Time practically flew by, and before I knew it, my time was up. I remember being in shock that 4 years had already passed. I planned on re-enlisting because there was nothing else out there for me in the world. It was just a few nights before I could fill out the forms to re-enlist when I was approached by some rather peculiar men. I could tell that they were powerful men by the way that the officers respected and almost seemed to fear them. They said they had a prestigious position available for me, and that because of my life circumstances, I was perfect for the job. Without a family and nobody outside of the military knowing I exist, nobody was better suited. The fact that I was good with a rifle didn't hurt either. I was also informed that if I accepted their offer, there would be no record of me having ever existed. Everything from my birth certificate and my military service would disappear. The thought of my military service being erased from the world made me cringe a little, but with everything taken into consideration, this was going to be one hell of a job offer, or so I thought. I later learned that these men were billionaires, high-ranking government and military officials, and some were even world diplomats. Before you get your tinfoil hats out, I feel the need to say that this wasn't the Illuminati, some Jewish conspiracy, the lizard people, or anything like that. This was one of the networks of powerful sociopaths, yes, but there are hundreds of those networks. Most conspiracy theorists make the mistake of thinking there is one collective behind it all. There isn't. There are networks of powerful, evil people who partake in conspiracies for a number of reasons. Most of them are only out to make more money or to expand their business interests in general. There are a few idealistic networks that are attached to an idea, the most powerful, to my knowledge, being the globalists. The people who want to bring about the New World Order and become the governing force of the earth, thinking they and their descendants will be some benevolent line of elite leaders humankind would be lucky to have. Those are easily the most fucked up people I've ever worked for. I guess it just goes to show, just because you're an elite, corrupt billionaire doesn't mean you can't be crazy too. But more on them later. Something I feel I need to explain is the fact that this can all be pretty confusing. None of these networks have names. People are sometimes connected to multiple networks, and many of the networks have connections to other networks. But this first one that recruited me was one of the most powerful I've ever worked for. I mean, they bossed around the military. That should tell you all you need to know. Obviously, I accepted their offer. This first network was interested in world politics and corruption. They did their best to bribe and control politicians around the world, and they did a damn good job of it too. My mission was to assassinate a politician in New Zealand. They didn't tell me about the kind of operation they were running. In fact, most of them don't. The guy's name was Bruce Beetham. After funding Beetham's primary opposition and getting him voted out of office, he started to do some investigation into election fraud, amongst other things. I was also instructed to destroy any evidence of any wrongdoing against my clients. They gave me 10 grand up front to cover any expenses I had in order to complete the mission. I was promised 100 grand after the mission was completed. I was in New Zealand within a few days. I didn't want to bring a gun, considering their gun laws over there are fucking crazy, even back then. Instead, I brought a small dosage of ricin with me, and I knew that that was all I was going to need. I began tracking him, studying his patterns, and things of that sort. I noticed that he must have been pretty comfortable because his security and safety precautions were pretty bare minimum. The guy didn't even have a house alarm. He just had a sign in the window that said he did. After 3 days of tracking him and noticing he seldom left his house, I set my plan in motion. It was the middle of the night and he lived alone with his wife. With some state-of-the-art break-and-enter technology I now had access to, I broke into his house. I crept in as silent as can be. I made my way to their bedroom and began pushing the door open. It was an old house, and the door made the worst squeaking sound you've ever heard. I pushed it so slowly that at times I wondered if it was moving at all. But I knew that I had to remain patient. Then, in the pitch black room, I heard motion. It was him. He sat up. "Is anyone there?" he asked. I was mortified, terrified that my plans were foiled. It took everything in me to maintain my composure and sit there, silently, waiting, listening, watching. He must have sat up for 15 minutes and it was excruciating. I knew I couldn't move or he'd hear me. I was trapped there. Each second felt like an hour, but I sat still. When he finally laid back down to go to bed, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. From there, it was easy to walk over and place the small dosage of ricin into his mouth. Shortly after, I made my way to his office and destroyed every piece of paper in there. Mission accomplished. I spent the rest of my time there kayaking. 2 days later, it was announced that he died of a heart attack. It's funny, in a way. My clients, they controlled all the media over there, so no one even reported on his death despite being a prominent politician. To this day, the way he died isn't available to the public. A lot of what I know about this case was learned later. Back then, I made the false assumption that because this network was working with the American military, it was good and moral. Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was. Days later, I was on one of their private yachts discussing how they planned on paying me. The man I assumed was the leader went onto the lower deck to get the cash when I suddenly saw another man come out. He looked to be some kind of military personnel by his build. "Who are you?" I asked. He responded by pulling a gun out of his jacket and firing at me. Luckily, I was quick enough to dodge the bullet by landing on the floor. He continued firing at me with his semi-automatic, but I pulled out my gun and shot him in the head. I knew that I was in danger and jumped off the yacht and swam to shore. Thankfully, I was covered by the darkness of the night. I later pieced together why they kill the men they hire. They can't afford to let their secrets get out. They can't afford to suppress information like this. The more I thought about the people involved in these conspiracies, the more it made sense. I remember how Lee Harvey Oswald was dead not too long after killing JFK. And the man who killed Oswald, Jack Ruby, was dead not too long after that. Not to mention you get government reports proposing magic bullet theory. Everyone just turned a blind eye to the fact that there was more than just one shooter that day. It's weird. There's enough evidence to say something fishy was going on, but not enough to say by who. The people chalk it up to be some grand coincidence. I've been in this line of work long enough to know that there are no fucking coincidences, especially not in politics. But before I get too off topic, let me continue my story. After I got back home, which was a shitty motel room now, I wondered what the hell I was going to do next. I can't go back into the military because those fuckers would find me there. I can't even apply for a job because, on the books, I don't exist. They erased everything about me, and it was smart of them to do it that way. When they killed me, nobody would have known except them. Luckily, I survived. There were a few months there when I was completely lost. I had no hope, no idea what to do next, and I was running out of money. Luckily, in the motel, I overheard a conversation that was life-changing to me. I overheard a few men talking about something called the Onion Router. As you all know, this was the early development of Tor, which granted access to the deep web. I was one of the first people on there, and I guess you could even say I was one of the first hitmen on the deep web. I didn't plan on becoming a hitman, it just sort of happened. I paid the motel enough to cover me for the next few months, and took what was left of the money and purchased a laptop. On this laptop, I familiarized myself with the deep web, the kind of business that was conducted there, and the kind of people who lurked about, looking for people like me. I'm sure these evil networks existed for hundreds of years and have been finding hitmen by other means for a long time, but I'm sure the deep web really sped up the process. Also, remember that this was the original deep web? Before it became a watered-down pop culture genre, this was when actual criminals went on the deep web. When the deep web was for criminals, by criminals. The deep web became pure cancer after 2013, and still remains that way to this day. Well, anyway, in December, I was on the deep web looking for any kind of a job. Morality meant nothing to me. I just needed to do something to make enough money to feed myself. I still remembered being homeless and sleeping on the streets. I would have done everything in my power to prevent that from happening again. I came across someone who was offering $150K to assassinate some singer. I responded to the offer and heard back from them immediately. They told me they had to vet me before they gave me the rest of the details. The person who hired me was rich. The house they brought me to was enormous. I almost couldn't believe my eyes. After they vetted me, I demanded they pay me in advance. I learned my lesson from last time. They agreed to do so and filled me in on the rest of the details. I was instructed to assassinate Sonny Bono. Prior to this assignment, I had no idea who the hell he was, but after doing some research, I discovered that I'd gotten myself into something serious. I didn't want to turn down the job, mostly because I didn't want to make someone that rich hate me. I agreed to the job and set out to get my target. After doing some digging, I discovered that he was vacationing in State Line, Nevada for a few days. I located him and rented a hotel room not too far from his. I watched him for a few days, waiting for my chance. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. On the way there, I had purchased a gun, but this was a populated area, and going to prison was not going to be in my future. One day, as I was thinking about how I was going to kill him, I saw that he was going skiing, alone. That couldn't have happened at a better time for me. I gave him a couple minutes to go before me and followed after. I hadn't been skiing in a long time, and I was nervous about having to kill him in that situation. I knew he was an experienced skier, but I took my chances. I knew it was the best way for me to do it. After he'd begun down the hill, I went quickly thereafter. After catching up to him, I thought about pulling out my pistol to shoot him, but the trees we were gliding right past seemed to be enough to take care of the job. I inched my way closer and closer, and then I pushed him with all my might and almost lost balance myself. My client had already informed me that he had contacts in the FBI and the media, so nothing suspicious would ever be reported. After that, I started to really enjoy the corrupt work I was doing. There was some strange satisfaction I took in helping these people. Well, after that one, I found a rather interesting offer when I was back searching on the deep web. Someone was offering hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual pay to kidnap young women alive. In retrospect, it should have been obvious what these girls were going to be used for, but at the time I just didn't think about it. When someone is offering to pay you $600,000 a year, the gray area seems to expand. But I did as I was told, kidnapping and later disposing of hundreds of young girls, mostly between the ages of 12 and 14. Those were the desirable ones. After kidnapping them, I deliver them to a boat and then to an island off the coast of Italy. I've spent quite a bit of time there, enough to know that there are quite a few elites from across the globe who frequented this place. From popular politicians to actors to bankers, they couldn't get enough of this place. Thankfully, when word of the island reached the public, I was able to distance myself from the entire thing and avoid any jail time. My client, being the wealthy bastard he is, bought his way out of any serious jail time too. After I heard the news, I kinda chuckled to myself. It really goes to show that we do live in an oligarchy. I continued to work for him on and off for many years. It's been a few months, but I'm sure he'll contact me again soon enough. You see, I've participated in hundreds of these kinds of things. I'm involved in the deaths of Bernie Grant, Ivor Hansen, Pierre Charles, Marcia Stanescu, Jesse Helms, and many, many more. Look it up, see for yourself how many of these people died, and tell me it isn't suspicious. I have a feeling that my clients will continue to do these things until the end of time, and they'll never be stopped. In July of 2016, I was hired by a powerful political organization that I frequently worked for. Over the years, I'd gained their trust and assisted in many assassinations, amongst other things. I was hired to make a leaker disappear. Despite my client's connections with local and federal law enforcement, the murder has become something of a popular conspiracy theory. One that people are very interested in figuring out once and for all. This is the first time there's ever been such widespread interest, at least with this client. This has caused me to lay low. I'm currently in South America, waiting for the fire to put itself out. Soon enough, people are gonna forget about the whole thing. They're gonna forget it ever happened, just like they always do. But this isn't necessarily my reason for making this. I'm putting this out there because it's time my clients paid for what they've done. I'm already a millionaire after having worked for them for so long. I've made my money, but now I'm done. I want you, the people, to know the fucking truth. I want you to know what they've done. And another thing. Who the fuck are you? I often like to view creepy things on the internet. I don't totally know why. I've just always been intrigued by things that are just off. Any media is fine to take in the content. Stories, movies, videos, audio clips, video games, whatever. I just want to be unnerved. I work third shift, so my sleep schedule is all messed up. I sleep during the day and work at night. I get 2 days off a week though, and always in a row. I could use this time to have some semblance of a normal life, but I'd rather not have to readjust my sleep schedule once work starts again. So I just stay up all night and sleep during the day. So, browsing the internet on one of those days off, I came to a thread which had a bunch of links on it. Each comment was just a link. Some of them led to websites about unexplained mysteries, some were streams of horror movies, and others were accounts of paranormal events which were supposedly true. Then I saw one that was none of the above. I don't remember what the link was. It was just random letters and numbers. It was nonsense. I clicked on it, and it took me to a single page with a single picture and nothing to click on. It auto full screened and refreshed at random intervals anywhere between roughly 2 and 10 seconds. There was text on the top of the picture which read as the following: Creepy. I liked this site. The picture showed a painting on the wall of a nondescript forest scene. There was a small TV screen centered at the bottom of the picture. An old CRT. On top of the TV was an old-looking analog clock with a wooden frame and fancy hands. The site continued to refresh, but the picture never changed. Out of sheer curiosity, I didn't leave the page. I kept the tab open and checked back every minute or two. Still, no change. After about 10 minutes, I got tired of missing the refreshes. Maybe it was changing drastically, but only once every minute or something, and I was completely missing it. So, I closed all other tabs to make sure I wouldn't be tempted to leave. I was staring at that picture for what seemed to be an hour. I checked my phone. It had been 26 minutes. I guess time goes slowly when you're just staring at a still image online. I can't say what it was or when it was, but at some point I noticed that it wasn't just a still image. Well, it was, but the image was changing. The clock, when I first pulled up the page, read something close to 4:15. Now, it was showing 4:56. The clock had been changing the entire time. I watched it for a full minute, and somewhere among the refreshes I saw the minute hand change to 57. The time on the clock didn't reflect the real time. Still, though, this was dedication. Someone had to take a picture once per minute for an hour, or at least 45 minutes, and then have it change every minute. I kept watching it until it showed 5 o'clock. I expected it to shift back to 4, but it just went ahead to 5:01. That's even more impressive. Maybe it went for a full 12 hours. Someone needs a job. Anyway, now I was hooked. I had to see if it had the full range of times. Now that I knew I didn't have to intently stare at the picture anymore, I was able to shift my focus to the text. It definitely seemed strange. I realized quickly that it was a code of sorts, and it said XIIXIX. I thought about it for a while, but then realized the colon in the phrase XII:XIX 12:19. I guess I had to wait until 12:19 to see what was going to happen, what was so worth all this work. The next few hours were boring. I check it every so often and see no change. Once I thought I saw something in the painting, but I'm pretty sure that was just my imagination and my mind wanting to see something. I set all of my clocks in my house to the time on the site so I'd know where it was even when I wasn't at my computer. 12 o'clock came and I was glued to my computer. No getting up, no other tabs. I was just staring intently, watching the hands on the clock refresh minute after minute. 12:18. Refresh, refresh, refresh. I was certain that this minute had actually taken 4 or 5 minutes to transpire. Finally, 12:19. Nothing. No change in the image. No change in the site. That was disappointing. I figured I'd at least get a message on the site or a different picture or something. Maybe that was the prank. Nothing. The guy who made this would lure people in, give them a simple puzzle to solve just to pique their intrigue, and then disappoint them greatly. Bravo, I thought myself, or brava, I quickly corrected. I left the website and went back to my day. I couldn't get the site out of my head though, not even an hour after I left. I had convinced myself that I should go back to the site, Control-Shift-T. After all, there are 2 12:19s in a day, aren't there? The clock now said 12:48. I looked over at the clock on my desk, and it also said 12:48. The creator must have kept it in sync with their local time or something. I had a nearly 12-hour wait ahead of me now. I could have stayed up all night for me, day for the normal people, but I didn't want to drive myself crazy, so I went to sleep. I didn't sleep well, or for very long, but then again I rarely do. I checked the clock on the desk, which was still set to the website time, and it said 8:52. Only a little over 3 hours to wait from here. I checked the site, and still no change in the image. I did things around the house and online to kill the next few hours. As soon as the clock was near 12 though, I was once again seated firmly in front of my computer screen. The next 18 minutes were agonizing. The last minute was even worse. The hands of the clock once again struck 12:19, and once again, nothing happened. I was distraught. I had invested a lot of time into this. The minute wasn't over though, so I continued to watch. I then heard a click, quiet but still audible. After that, I noticed that the web page wasn't constantly refreshing anymore. The screen on the TV began to brighten. Finally. What I had waited for was happening. As the screen on the TV brightened, I began to be able to make out an image. It was small, because the TV screen on my monitor was only about 2 inches wide, but I could still clearly see that they were showing woods. Maybe it was the forest in the picture. The camera was bobbing up and down as grass and leaves passed by. It must have been someone filming themselves, walking. The camera was kept pointed at the ground for the first minute or so, but then slowly started to point more horizontally. I could see that they were coming up on a yard. Some houses flashed quickly on the edges of the screen. There was someone talking in another language. I couldn't say what language that was, and then clicks and clunks like they were dealing with equipment. The camera made larger movements than before. I realized, as the sounds went away and the image stabilized dramatically, that they'd been setting up on a tripod. Once they got set up, I heard a little more talking, and then a camera made one final turn. During the turn, I could see that it was a setup just along the woods. The camera finally stopped shaking, and there was a house centered within the frame. As small as it was, I could tell that it was my house. I jumped up from my desk chair, but kept my eyes fixed on the screen. The men abandoned their camera and walked up to the house, walked up to my house. They stood at the door for what was probably 20 seconds, but it seemed like 5 minutes. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if there was anything to do. They knocked on the door. I heard it faintly through my speakers, but it wasn't at the door. Not hearing it within my house calmed me down enough to check the door. Nobody was there. Nobody was in the yard, but I couldn't make anything out past a couple 100 feet. It was dark out, and the moon wasn't very bright. I closed and locked the door, and ran back up to the computer. The screen was still displaying these 2 men standing at the door. They knocked again, but this time harder. I watched as the door opened. A man answered. I couldn't make him out. I was half expecting it to be me. I was relieved, though, to see it wasn't. I have brown hair. The man on the screen had red. One of the men gestures something to him, and the red-haired man begins to close the door. At this point, the other man shoves the door open again, pulls a gun from his belt, and shoots the man in the head. I felt my face go pale and my jaw fall open. My vision started to go black, but I forced myself to keep my composure. The 2 men ran from the door and toward the camera. In the small TV screen on my monitor, and in the blur of motion, I could still see that both men were smiling widely. They grabbed the camera, not bothering to take it off the tripod, and ran into the woods again. The camera swiveled on the tripod and showed one of the men's faces, but quite blurrily. He looked at the camera, reached over toward it with his other hand, and the screen of the TV went blank. The page refreshes again, but only once, and the clock still read 12:19. I exited out of my browser and even shut down my computer. I ran to the door one last time to see if I could see anything. Once again, there was no one there. To this day, I still have no clue what actually took place. I haven't had the nerve to revisit that website or ask anybody what happened to the people who lived there before I did, and I'm not sure I ever will. I don't consider myself to be a particularly superstitious person. Okay, sure, I get a kick out of the horoscope once in a while. My boyfriend and I like to humor the idea that spirits and poltergeists exist, and how we'd haunt people when we died and came back as ghosts. In fact, my boyfriend refuses to go anywhere near a Ouija board. refuses to even think of it. I blame all of the crummy horror movies he watches. Why even tempt it, he'd say. Why would you want to taunt evil ghosts like that? Ghosts never play fair, and if you piss one off, you're screwed. I don't think he was very serious, just precautionary. But maybe he was right. God, this all happened so long ago. I'm still shaken though. Can barely write about it now without my nerves acting up. Okay, here it goes. A few weeks ago, my mom, sis, and I went to Colorado for an entire week on vacation. We were going to drive all over the state, visit parks and go horseback riding and whitewater rafting and so much more. I was excited and I sorely needed a break from my work anyway. We drove 16 hours out there and spent our first day rafting down the rivers. After an exciting day, we drove to a ranch house to go horseback riding. We got there at sunset, so it was a little too late to ride, but we had all next day to ride the trails and see the sights. The ranch was, well, dumpy, all run down with scraps of steel everywhere, and the shoddy cabins that we were staying in were in desperate need for repair. I swear the roof over our shack of a cabin was a giant piece of drywall with shingles stapled to the top of it. My sister and I thoroughly checked the place for spiders and bugs before we even thought of bringing our luggage in. It was only for the night, I reassured myself. Just one night in a dumpy shack on a rock-hard bed that probably had bed bugs under the sheets. I shuddered at the thought. My mom tried to cheer us up. She had brought skewers and a pack of giant beef hot dogs to roast over the communal fire pit. Happy to get out of the shack, my sister and I made a nice cozy fire, and soon a few other people from the other cabins came to sit around the fire and roast s'mores and share stories. We talked about where we were from, where we were going, and our adventures along the way. Pretty soon, the stories turned into tales and urban legends and the sort of stuff you'd usually tell around a bonfire. That's when I spoke up. I loved stories, especially scary ones. And hey, we're out west, we're in a Native American territory. Why not liven up the place with my favorite Indian myth, the legend of the Skinwalkers. Now, for those of you who don't know, Skinwalkers are considered very evil, very dangerous beings. They were humans who gained the ability to take on the form of an animal by wearing its skin, usually through very dark and taboo magic. I knew all of this and told my story. Who doesn't love a good ghost story? Everyone seemed to be enjoying it. I admit I took some creative liberties with it, really just retelling an old werewolf story but with a skinwalker instead. I bullshitted a lot of the story, really, and added a few things that weren't in the mythos at all. I gave our beloved frightening skinwalker wide, crazy eyes with pinpoints for pupils with a matching insane smile. I made the skinwalker horribly misshapen with swollen joints and arms that were too long and legs that were too short and a head that never sat straight on its shoulders. I made it as terrifying as I could imagine. No one minded. They actually really liked it, and a man from Kentucky admitted the visuals alone were enough to creep him out. Victory in my book, if you ask me. And once I was done, everyone decided it was getting really late. Our firewood was dwindling, and it was a good time as any to turn in for the night. We packed up our skewers and s'mores, doused the fire, and headed to our little shacks. I tossed and turned a lot trying to fall asleep. Couldn't get comfortable on that damn bed. A rock was probably cozier than that mattress. So, against my better judgment, I got out of the bed and walked about the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep no matter what I was lying on. I think I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor. I wasn't that desperate. Yet. It was pitch black outside, no lights from any nearby street lamps, no car headlights, hell, not even the cabin lights were on, and I don't even remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back as simply the cold tile floor making me shake. I did, however, find it odd that there weren't any lights on at all on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or on the main office, but no. Nothing. This was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch, and for some stupid fucking reason, I decided to go walking around. Eventually, my eyes adjusted where I could see well enough to move around. I paced up and down the road where the cabin sat and circled around to the fence in the field where the horses were out, grazing. Except, there weren't any horses, probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting awfully cold. I turned right around to head back to my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out all alone at an obscene hour. I had realized I needed to get to bed. But when I turned, there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness. I could barely make it out. It was tall and thin. I shrugged it off as just a pole or something else and kept walking, but then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat and I could barely breathe. I just imagined that, I said. I just imagined it. I'm freaking myself out. Get your fucking head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against the cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against a barely visible sleet, gray night. Now, I could see it. It was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long, its legs impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body and a head much too big for its stick neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that. It just stood there, twitching, arms jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I still stood there like the dumb fuck I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing, and I wasn't so stupid as to try to walk past it. My only option was to go around, behind the cabins and the stables, and hope it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground and step backwards. My flip-flop made a wet smacking sound as it flopped against my feet, and I immediately froze in horror. The thing stopped, too. It stood there, perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow, and I panicked and I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest. My whole body was shaking, but I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, so goddamn slowly, bend over and slipped my feet out of those fucking flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and the crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side to see where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, and there was no visible debris between them. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that fucking thing was gone. It was fucking gone. It fucking knew I was there. It was coming for me. Oh fuck. Yet I still couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move no matter how loud my head screamed, "Run! Run!" I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively. Even though I knew better, I still turned around. I was greeted with 2 bulging eyes. Oh god, its eyes. Staring at me, unblinking with 2 black pinholes for pupils and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide for anything to be remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that fucking thing. I ran. I fucking ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream, but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt. I stomped over anything in my way. I even impaled my foot on a sharp rock. I didn't even care. I just ran. I felt the cold creeping up my back. Oh god, the cold. It was sinking right into my bones, and I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing. I didn't stop until I burst through the cabin doors and deadbolted the lock and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head there, and I gasped and shook for breath. And I waited. I didn't sleep the entire night. I was too scared. I couldn't get rid of the chill. All I thought about was that thing, standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke, and I finally allowed myself a breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me. and now that it was light, it couldn't take me by surprise. Mom noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I tracked in through the cabin. I shrugged it off, said I cut myself the night before when we were making s'mores. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push. We left not long after that. And as we left, I looked at the place where that thing once stood, and I shuddered again. But there was nothing. I assured myself. There was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and to our companions, and I noticed the man from Kentucky who said he thoroughly enjoyed my story. He told me again how much he liked it, said he was going to tell it to his own kids when he got home. They really like scary stories, he said, and as we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled a wide, insane smile as he waved us goodbye. I'm doing my best to write this as fast as I can. I need to get the truth out there, and I don't have much time left. I'm going right after I finish this, but I need to get the truth out there. People need to know what happened at Lewis County High School on March 16th. Whatever the news is telling you is wrong. Whatever the school officials are telling you is wrong, and whatever you're reading on Twitter is wrong. I'm going to tell you what really happened, because I was there. I understand it's going to be a little hard to believe at first, but the more you look at the evidence, the more you're going to see that I'm right. To begin, let me explain who I am so you understand where I'm coming from. My name is Kevin. I was your typical overachiever. I lived to study. I got the best grades in every class I was in, and most people knew that I was going places someday. I had a small clique of friends, and they were similar to me, although I was the undisputed leader. My girlfriend and I had a wonderful relationship, and very few people had anything bad to say about us. Her name was Olivia. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and there will always be a place in my heart for that sweet girl. On the day it happened, I was in my computer programming class finishing up an assignment with my girlfriend. The computer lab was right next to an exit, so we were really close to those emergency speakers. The sound was deafening. My teacher rushed over to the door and locked it. He then instructed the class to get under the tables. We had no idea if it was a drill or the real thing. Nobody said a word the entire time. We sat there in complete silence. Everyone seemed extremely nervous. We all knew that school shootings were becoming more and more common, but we just weren't prepared for this. It must have been at least 15 minutes before anything happened. It sounded very distant at first, and it gradually got closer and closer, until it was the only thing that I could hear. I know everyone around me heard it too. One of my friends looked like he was about to piss his pants. The footsteps got closer and closer to the door. Then they stopped. The following silence seemed to last for hours. I felt my stomach drop, and a girl in the class started sobbing softly into her hands. Olivia started squeezing my hand. The jingling got more and more violent as the moments passed. For a brief moment, I began thinking of the stupidity of this man. Does he really think violently shaking the doorknob is going to unlock it? Well, it appeared that way because he continued for quite some time. I glanced over at my teacher, and he was shaking. He seemed so out of his element. I almost pitied him. I started thinking of an exit strategy. The exit right outside of the door had a long flight of stairs, and there was no way we were going to get past this guy. We couldn't jump out the windows because we were on the second floor. There was no realistic way to get to the air vent, and even if we could, the school made them arbitrarily hard to climb into. There seemed to be no escaping this fate. No escaping this man. No escaping death. I leaned over so I could see the window on the doorway, and I swear to God, I thought I saw the Grim Reaper standing there. Olivia pulled me back and told me not to show any signs we were in here, as if that made any difference. He knew. The sound of gunshots could be heard outside of the room. It appeared as though the man was shooting the doorknob. After a few shots were fired, we all breathed a sigh of relief because he still hadn't been able to get in. That relief evaporated quickly when we heard the doorknob drop to the floor. The girl in the class who'd been sobbing before was now full on crying. We all wanted to as well. We knew what was coming. The man slowly made his way into the room. We all looked up from under the table at the most hideous man any of us had ever seen. His skin looked burned. He had no hair on his head. He had a patchy beard and was dressed in a trench coat that looked like it had been washed in a pile of mud. There was mud dripping off of him onto the floor. He had a number of weapons on him. From what I could tell, at that moment, at least 2 pistols, a machete, a few weapons strapped to his back. I now know it was an AK-47 and a sniper rifle. This guy looked like a one-man army ready to fight the entire world. It's almost ironic in a way. He chose to fight a school of defenseless kids. He walked forward until he was a few steps in front of us. He pointed his pistol at the girl who was crying.
Get up, bitch.
The girl started sobbing even louder.
I said, get up, bitch.
She slowly made it to her feet.
Now come give Pop Pop a big old kiss.
The girl was scared to death. Her face was pure red. Tears streamed down her face like it was the Mississippi River. I knew this girl too. She was such a sweetheart. Watching this happen to her was horrifying. She slowly took baby steps until she was standing right in front of him.
Now, who's your daddy?
It sounded like she murmured something between sobs, but nobody could hear it.
I can hear you.
You are Pop Pop.
Good. Now come give me a kiss right here.
He placed his middle finger on the center of his right cheek. She took another step forward and began leaning, closer and closer, until he shot her right through the head. Her lifeless corpse fell to the floor with a thud.
Not enough enthusiasm, bitch.
The group of us that had remained were in shock. Nobody could even move. Pop Pop then got down on the floor next to the poor girl's body and picked it up. He held her in his arms for a moment and looked right into her face.
Such a beautiful girl you are.
He then spun her around. We looked on with a disturbed curiosity for whatever the hell he was going to do next. He brought his face closer and closer to the bullet hole in her head. My eyes then began to show me something that my brain couldn't process at the time. He started licking the bullet wound in her head. Everyone looked away, repulsed. My teacher started to vomit. Pop Pop stopped and looked at us.
Hey, you fuckers need to watch or I'll kill you too.
There wasn't much of a reaction from us. We continued to watch in disgust, half expecting the same fate as our classmate. Multiple people in the room began sobbing, including my girlfriend, Olivia. She squeezed my hand so hard it started to hurt. Olivia nestled her face into my arm to shield herself from the monster before us. Pop Pop dropped the corpse and looked right at us. My stomach dropped. Olivia didn't move. I don't think she realized the situation.
You.
Olivia turned her head to see that abomination staring directly at her.
What? Little bitch can't watch?
She didn't say anything in response. She just stared at him with her beautiful brown eyes. He started walking towards us, and I knew that I had to act fast. No! I shouted. You're not touching her.
Well, well, well. We have a hero here, don't we?
I didn't know what else I could say, so I said the only thing my mind would allow me to. Fuck you. You're a monster, and if you have any sense in that bald head of yours, you'd stick that gun right in your mouth and pull the trigger right now.
You're a little hero, aren't you? Trying to save your girlfriend, huh?
I'm not gonna let you hurt her.
Listen to me, boy. There's nothing you can do to stop me. And just for that little outburst there, I'm gonna make you watch her die.
At that moment, me and Olivia looked up at each other, got up, and ran as fast as we could. When we ran past him, he tried grabbing us, but thankfully we were fast enough to get around him. We made it to the doorway and started running toward the exit. Right before we got through the door, he shot at us. I immediately felt Olivia's pace come to a halt. I looked over, and she was shot in the stomach. I tried dragging her the last little bit, but there was no hope. I knew we were fucked. Olivia, come on, we gotta go. She fainted from blood loss. I turned around to see that Pop was right behind us.
Thought you could run from me?
Fuck you.
Not the answer I was looking for. You're gonna pay for your hate speech, Kevin.
He knocked me down and I hit the floor with a hard thud. He picked up Olivia and made his way down the hall. It felt like my left arm was broken, but I got up, determined to catch that bastard. As I started jogging down the hall, I wondered how the hell he knew my name. That, on top of his superhuman strength, were my first clues leading me to believe that he wasn't human. I did my best to keep up with him, but I had a hard time. He was moving much faster than he had been earlier. The only reason I didn't lose him completely was because of the trail of blood from Olivia's gunshot wound. Part of me contemplated turning around and getting the fuck out of there, but I knew I had to keep going. I knew that if I didn't, she'd probably end up dead. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to live with myself. I knew there wasn't much of a chance that I could save Olivia, but I was going to give it my best shot. After just a few minutes of chasing him, something very lucky happened for me. I saw, out of the corner of my eye, an open locker. Inside of it was a baseball bat. Yes, I quietly whispered to myself with a small ounce of hope. I picked it up and knew I'd have a chance to fight that fucking monster. I continued to follow the blood trail with only the sound of the school alarm still going off to keep me company. After a few minutes, I turned a corner and saw that beast. He still had Olivia, and he was standing right in front of the principal's office. He wasn't facing me, and I snuck up behind him. With the cover of the alarms masking my footsteps, I quietly made my way behind him. Okay, one quick hit over the head should do it, I thought to myself. I released more adrenaline in that moment than I had ever in my entire life. I was scared out of my mind, but I had to save Olivia. I got close enough and got ready to swing. I pulled my arms back and let him have it. What the fuck? The bat broke in half and he didn't even flinch. I had no idea what to do. What the fuck are you?
I am God, and it's time you and I play a little game.
What game is that?
It's called the Do You Want Olivia to Die game.
He then handed me a pistol.
If you don't want Olivia to die, you're going to take this pistol and shoot your own finger off.
Are you fucking crazy? Why don't I just shoot you?
Did you see what happened to the bat? Kevin, do you really think a bullet would do any better?
I stood there for a moment, trying to process everything that was happening. But I can't.
Yes, you can. I'll tell you what. I'm going to make it easy for you. Shoot one of your fingers off before I get to one, or Olivia dies here and now, right in front of your eyes. And you'll have to live with the fact that you killed her, Kevin, not me, you. 3, 2...
Oh God. There. Are you happy? Now let her go.
I'm sorry if you misunderstood me. We're playing a game right now, and that's only the first part.
No, I'm done. I'm not gonna sit here shooting off all my fingers just so you can kill my girlfriend anyway.
Kevin, have some faith in me, boy. I will let her live if you do what I say. You're just gonna have to trust me, but she'll definitely die if you don't play by my rules.
Okay, what's next then? Shoot myself in the kneecap?
Of course not. I just had you shoot your finger off to see if you were dedicated enough. I see now that you're plenty dedicated. You won't be shooting yourself anymore today, unless you choose to do so yourself.
Okay then, what's next?
Follow me, boy.
And with that, I followed him as he walked into the principal's office. I got more and more horrified with each moment that passed. This thing was pure evil. I was sure of it. He went to the door and tried opening it. Upon realizing it was locked, he pulled back his free arm that wasn't holding Olivia and punched the door down. My principal was in the corner and looked scared out of her mind. I started getting sick imagining what he was going to do next. Pop turned around and looked me right in the eye.
"Shoot her, or Olivia dies."
By this point, I knew that arguing with him was pointless. With the gun in my right hand, I slowly got ready to shoot. Tears started streaming down the principal's face, and I could feel myself wanting to cry too. "I'm sorry, Principal Mattarella."
Good. Now, wanna know what your next task is?
You're an evil fuck. You know that? You're going to hell.
I probably should, shouldn't I? With all the pain and misery I've caused, the funny thing is that I won't. I know I won't. God can't go to hell. It doesn't work like that, Kevin, but I know who is going to hell. You are. But before you start going all religious on me, I'm gonna need you to take these.
He gave me a handful of matches. What the hell am I supposed to do with these?
Set Mrs. Mattarella on fire.
Are you fucking kidding me?
How many times are you gonna question me, boy? Backtalk me one more time, and Olivia dies too.
I wanted to die right then and there, but after all I'd done to save Olivia, I figured it all would have been for nothing if I didn't go through with it. It was traumatic, watching my principal's body burn like that. Even worse knowing I was the one who killed her and set the corpse on fire in the first place. I don't know what changed in me after that moment. I felt dead inside. In retrospect, that's when my innocence died. I couldn't believe what I'd done, and I still can't live with the guilt. We stood there, watching the corpse decompose in the flames for a few minutes. Then, he wanted to go somewhere else.
Come on, you've got one last thing you need to do, and Olivia will be fine.
I didn't even reply. I just followed him when he started to walk. We took the stairs and eventually made our way to the roof of the building. The entire time, I was staring at Olivia. She looked so helpless being carried around by this monster. When we got there, all I could hear was an orchestra of police sirens. There must have been 1,000 police cars out there. We got to the middle of the flat roof and stood there for a moment. Well, he didn't say anything, and it took him a few minutes to finally turn around and do something. He rolled a grenade across the floor over to me. I knew what he expected me to do. I bent down and picked it up off the floor. It was heavier than I thought it would be. With tears streaming down my face, I made my way to the edge of the roof. The cops saw me, and some started pointing at me. I hesitated for a moment. From the bullhorn, I could hear them saying things like, "It's going to be okay," and to wait for the police officers to get to me. I pulled the pin out of the grenade. "I'm so sorry." Without any warning, a large force pushed me off the roof of the building. I landed right in the fire and barely survived. I was rushed to the hospital and just became stable a few hours ago. They never found Pop, and as far as I know, everyone thinks that I'm responsible for this. From killing and burning the principal, to shooting Olivia, to throwing that grenade, they think that I fucking did this. My heart was shattered in half when I saw that my own parents believed this story too. I tried to explain it to them. I tried telling them that Pop made me do it, but nobody believed me. Not my parents, not the nurses, and not the police. I wanted to do everything in my power to convince them, find the proof, maybe hire a detective, but all my hope withered to nothing when I heard that Olivia succumbed to her wounds. I'd done all that for nothing. All those people died, and it didn't even save her life. Later that day, I limped to the roof of the hospital where I planned on jumping. I deserve this, I thought to myself. As I jumped off and felt the wind brush past my face, I whispered, "Why did you do this to me?"
Because that's just what I do.
What is the most frightening thing you can think of? There's actually a unanimously correct response. By going into the darkest and most horrific part of the brain, could one finally understand what one certain fear causes the body to go into hyperdrive and activate the fight or flight response. Any living being is ultimately condemned to choose fear or curiosity at this one simple piece of knowledge, the unknown. This is why people are afraid of the dark, of monsters, of heights. The thrill is unknown to them. Their body isn't prepared to explain what lies ahead. The logs you're about to see have recently been released to the public for a few weeks in hopes of finding new leads. The logs took place over the span of January 13th, 2014 to February 7th, 2014. It has yet to be explained what exactly happened to Daniel Smith. The following videos should be viewed with caution. They contain graphic and violent material. Hello, my name is Daniel Smith. I've decided to start making a video journal of my life and upload it here to YouTube. I've started to wonder what would happen after I'm gone. Does anyone truly know me? The real me? I never really kept in touch with most of my friends after my freshman year of college. Zach is the only one I really kept in contact with nowadays. After the incident, I haven't really told anyone what really happened to me, not even him. Possibly by getting this off my chest after holding it in for 3 years would help with the night terrors that keep happening. I've literally tried everything, so I'll do my best to explain.
Daniel, it's time for dinner.
Shit, gotta cut this one short. Daniel leaves the screen, forgetting to turn off the webcam. Seconds later, he returns. Fuck, I'll finish the log tomorrow. There's a screen tear before the video ends. The voice heard calling Daniel is his mother. Alright, so I intended to finish my first vlog yesterday, but some things came up. Anyways, let me try and explain how this all started. I graduated high school in May of 2010 with a full ride to East Carolina University pursuing computer science. I was hoping to develop a video game one day. Eventually, my hopes started to become reality when I was top of my class in all of my computer coding classes. See, all my friends were into playing games as much as I was, so we all decided that we wanted to make it a career. All 4 of us dreamed about making a huge advancement in the gaming field, and boy, we did. I was the brains of the operation. By now, I had taken every coding class possible to learn all the tricks. I even taught myself basic graphic design and video editing in my spare time. My main focus was on virtual reality. It has been pursued many times in the past, but no real breakthroughs had occurred. The Oculus Rift was still in development, so we had to make our own version. Zach was the tech genius. He could take anything and make something useful out of it. Him and Joey made this ungodly mechanism that went over your eyes, but it got the job done. So, now it was my turn to figure out what game we would create. Horror games were my personal favorite. I loved getting scared and being in control, unlike in horror movies. Regardless, I had to find out what scared people, so we all decided to do a survey on campus. We found the majority were afraid of heights, the darkness, or ghosts. Clowns, roller coasters, and other things were part of the lesser majority, but one thing stood out to me. Only about 2 people came up with the answer that spawned the idea of my game: the unknown. After some hard thinking, I realized that the unknown really frightened everyone. All the answers I got fell under that category. They don't know what lurks in the darkness, what a ghost is capable of doing to them, or even how to react during a roller coaster. When you aren't in control, you're scared. Knowing that something else can break through the barriers of your mind and take control of your feelings is the most disturbing thought you can have. Daniel stares blankly at the screen for about 40 seconds without moving. The video appears to be paused until we notice his chest moving as he breathes. He eventually blinks his eyes and looks away before he speaks again. I'll tell more later. Feeling kinda tired right now. The audio becomes distorted when Daniel says this. It seems to play over itself twice, with the second voice being a few octaves lower than his normal voice. Well, I've been sick the past few days, so I haven't really felt like doing this, but I have to finish my story. As I said before, the unknown was the main motive for the development of my game. I decided to make the prototype as a maze for the player to walk through. I had a creature chase after the player through the maze to add the fear factor. Sounds would distort throughout to give the player a sense of excitement. The farther you got in the maze, the more sounds would disturb you. I took the idea from the popular game Slender, where you find pages in a dark forest. The more pages you find, the more noises would play, adding to the creepy ambience. Anything from the distant scream of a girl to the sound of your own heartbeat would be heard through the player's headphones. Well, after long hours of coding and researching, the prototype was ready. David was the first to test it. Daniel looks down for a few seconds and then looks back up before speaking again. You know, our minds are made to know everything we sense, no matter what it takes. But when the mind has used up all resources to explain certain pieces of information, all hell breaks loose. The body produces adrenaline, causing you to run faster, farther, sweat, and breathe heavier. Our minds use all the energy that is supposed to explain this piece of information and injects it all into our muscles to get away, or face the abomination. I wanted to find that abomination. The video seems to slow down and the screen flickers back to different pieces of the clip. It shows Daniel saying the words fear, disturb, unknown, and scream before the video finally cuts to black. This log shows an empty room. Daniel is nowhere to be seen in the footage for the first few minutes. At about 7:06 a.m., the door to the room opens and the outline of a figure is standing, facing the webcam. The figure stands, unmoving, for 2 full hours before the door slams shut by an unknown force. The screen then goes black. So I reviewed the footage from last night and I'm not really sure what happened. I think my computer overheated, causing the recording software to fuck up. Anyways, the tests went pretty normal for a while. All 4 of us tried it out and loved it. David couldn't get enough of it. He was the first person to suggest we get more people around campus to try it and give us suggestions on how to improve it. We all agreed. After having dozens of kids try it out, I got to work on the suggestions. Everything from the sounds to the monster to the maze was all changed. The main concern was that people could memorize the layout of the maze after a few playthroughs. One boy suggested we play this game called Amnesia: The Dark Descent to help come up with more fear-inducing gameplay. I found the game and loved the impact. It's a first-person survival horror game where you have to navigate through a haunted castle, avoiding monsters and solving puzzles. The hook of this game is when you're in the dark too long, your character starts to hallucinate. Before using their idea, I decided to contact the developers before making my own knockoff. After explaining that I was in college, what my major was, and the project we had going, they approved. They actually wanted to send me a few of their discs and drives that had in-depth information on the game and how it was created. They just wanted most of the credit when and if it got big. I skipped my classes on Friday to get an early weekend start on the game and got pretty far into it. I swapped the maze idea for an abandoned insane asylum. Also, I took out the single monster idea and had multiple deranged beings come after you or pop up in windows. I decided to take out some of the audio and make it almost completely silent. I would still put in the distant screams and the heartbeat, but no other unknown background fillers. Doors would creak, your footsteps, and when you were attacked, the being screamed and clawed at you. These were the main audio pieces that were promoting the realistic feel to the game. Again, Daniel pauses and looks down. He continues to look down as he speaks again. Sometimes we forget the reason we feel fear. It's just there for one simple reason, to save us from the unknown. Daniel quickly looks back up to the screen. I'll get more into it tomorrow because I have to go into work. The screen goes black after Daniel closes his laptop. The camera shows a dark room again. Daniel is still nowhere to be seen, although it is unknown how the laptop was reopened. The door to the room is shut, and there is no noise. At 7:06 p.m., the door to the room slowly opens, and the dark figure from behind stands, unmoving, for 3 full minutes before entering the room. There is no movement of the figure suggesting that it's walking. It seems to glide across the floor and out of view of the camera. It isn't until 9:06 p.m. that the door shuts by an unknown force and the laptop closes, shutting off the webcam. Daniel's eyes are bloodshot and tired looking. He rubs them and yawns before speaking. Well, I couldn't sleep for shit last night after work. I kept getting woken up by nightmares. I can't even remember what they were about. Anyways, I guess I'll just get today's log out of the way. By the time I finished up most of the new gameplay, we were all on Christmas break. I really needed the guys to help test out my new version, but everyone was busy or had plans. Well, what else would you do in this situation? I tried it myself. This is the point at which Daniel stares at the screen, except he isn't just staring blankly. He seemed to be looking at something on his screen. What the? A horrified look appears on Daniel's face as he backs away from the screen and runs out of the room. 20 minutes pass before Daniel walks back into the room and sits down at the chair. His face is looking downward until he sits down. As he looks up at the camera, a screen tear happens for a split second. If you pause the video at the second Daniel looks up, his eyes are completely sunken in and black. When the video cuts back to normal, Daniel continues on with his story as if nothing happened. When I put the headgear on and headphones on, it almost felt too real. I walked toward the asylum and looked up at it. It was raining and there were flashes of lightning every few seconds. I walked inside and found that everything was completely silent. I had the heart monitor strapped to my chest, so my heartbeat was the only sound in my headphones. As I walked through the asylum, I noticed a few unbelievable changes. The rooms and hallways were in unnaturally smooth detail. I continued through the asylum, found the flashlight, keys to the rooms, and the hidden objects I had placed throughout the game as a point system. The weirdest part was, the monsters hadn't appeared. I heard the screams, my footsteps, the general noises, nothing else. That was, until I got to the basement. See, I made a series of tunnels and rooms in the basement that was sort of identical to the main floor. It was darker and I made the footsteps sound different, but there were other sounds as well. I would hear an extremely light scratching sound on the concrete walls if I would stand still. Sometimes I would hear low whispering right in my ear and maniacal laughter far in the distance. This disturbed me. I made every fiber of this game and had no recollection of putting those in there. When I found most of the objects, I came to one final room. I also had no memory of making this either. It contained a tall wooden door with a giant lock on it, but no windows or even a handle. After constant searching, I found a black key that I had never seen before. I was still baffled by all of this, but I wanted to see this through to the end. With no explanation of the key, I returned to the door and tried it. After a long wait and complete silence, I figured the game had crashed on me. Right before I removed the headgear, I heard a creaking sound. As I looked through the headgear once more, I found that the door was wide open. In the game, I made it so the flashlight would have a dwindling energy supply. One of the things you have to find are batteries scattered throughout the asylum. You can also find matches to help give you a short supply of light until you can hopefully find some spare batteries. Well, I was fucking out of batteries, and I had 3 matches left. Daniel's face turns horrified. But when I struck the match, it just blew out. As soon as they looked up at me, oh god, the eyes. There were dozens of these orange, fiery eyes. As soon as the video hit 7:06 a.m., Daniel abruptly quiets and then starts sobbing and looks off screen to the right. "I'm sorry. Okay? I didn't know I would let them out. He made..." The video turns black and ends. Daniel is seen standing in the middle of the room with his back turned to the screen. He's completely nude except for a bag covering his head. His arms are outstretched and he has 3 gashes on his back. A deep whispering sound is the only thing you hear from the video. Daniel stays silent, standing in this position until 11:59 p.m. The video ends at 12 a.m. the next morning. Upon further investigation of this clip, the audio was increased intensely. The deep voice seems to repeat the phrase, "He comes," throughout the video. Zach is the one in this log. He's silent for about 15 seconds. "So, Daniel's mom told me he was making these video logs and I just wanted to come and finalize them for him by telling everyone what happened. Daniel was found lying in his room here a couple weeks ago. He was naked and cut up pretty bad. They took him to the hospital and found that the wounds were self-inflicted and that he tried to kill himself. I haven't gone through these videos yet, but I know something has to be in here. I just wanted people to know that Daniel is in critical care." Zach pauses for a few seconds as he starts to tear up. "They say that the wounds, they were so deep and the blood loss was so drastic that he won't survive. His body is rejecting all medication and he isn't supposed to make it through the night." Zach sobs for a few minutes before continuing. "Really, the hardest part about dealing with this is that David passed away as well. About 5 months ago, he dropped dead from a sudden brain aneurysm. We tried to contact Daniel about this, but we couldn't get in touch with him. I'm gonna find out what happened to you, Daniel. I swear it." He shuts off the camera. Zach seems to be in a panic and rushing as he speaks. "Alright, so I watched all of his logs and something is fucked up. He never acted this way until he got into that game. I've tried to contact Joey, but he won't return my calls. The reason I'm here now is because Daniel was like a brother to me, and I'm not about to move on without knowing the truth. Something happened when he played that game, and I have to find out. I don't know what he saw or what he found, but I feel like it's connected to his death. I need to find it and that headset." Zach gets up and rushes around the room. After 11 minutes, he finds the headset in the top of the closet and the game in a locked drawer. He seems to forget that the webcam is still on, as we assume he starts up the game. He puts on the headset and headphones and immediately starts to scream. The webcam audio is muted, but Zach seems to be terrified and rips off the headset. As soon as he takes it off, the lights go out and the video cuts. The room is barely visible through the darkness and Zach isn't in sight. At 7:06 p.m., the door to the room slowly opens, revealing the silhouette of a young man in what seems to be a hospital gown. After about 30 seconds, the figure slowly walks over toward the bed as the room becomes flooded with light. Daniel is now visible and he stands motionless, facing the bed. As he leans over, bloodstains become visible on the back of his gown and grow larger as the minutes pass. On the bed, mangled to a point of almost no recognition, is Zach's body. The blue and white shirt is the only indication of him. Daniel starts laughing maniacally. His body starts to contort unnaturally. His bones start breaking. He leans back and walks on his hands and feet toward the screen. His eyes are pitch black and his mouth is in a devilish grin. He laughs for a few seconds before the deep voice erupts from his mouth and says only 2 words.
"He's here."
These videos are still being investigated and have revealed little explanation as to what exactly happened. The only facts that have been recovered are: we tried to contact the people who gave Daniel the permission and software from Amnesia, The Dark Descent, but no one confessed to knowing anything about his call. They also agree that the items sent to Daniel did not belong to their company. Daniel's mother has been put in a mental hospital after a sudden attempt of suicide. Zach's body had multiple gashes, similar to the one seen on Daniel's back. Daniel's whereabouts are still unknown. I've been working as a private investigator for the past 3 or so years. I chose this profession because I found myself bored with life and hoped that this career would give me a few thrills. It isn't exactly the Sherlock Holmes type work I was hoping for, but it does keep me busy. Yesterday was the most thrilling day in my career by far. It all started 2 days ago when a woman who looked to be in her late 30s walked into the office. For privacy's sake, I'll refer to her as Maria. I had a sit down with Maria and took notes on the case. My husband has been disappearing a lot. He leaves work at 8 and doesn't come home until almost midnight.
How long has this been going on? I asked her.
About 3 months. He always told me that he had to work overtime because his company has been working on this huge project. Last week was our anniversary, so I got off work early and set up a candlelit dinner. He wasn't home by 6, so I decided to call his boss. I asked him if he could send my husband home so that we may have dinner together, and his boss informed me that he had already left. I hung up the phone and eagerly awaited his arrival. I sat down and waited for hours and hours, staring at the clock. My husband got home at 11:47 p.m. I asked him what took him so long, and he told me I had to stay for overtime. I begged them to let me leave, but they wouldn't let me. I threw out the dinner and went to sleep. I called his boss the next day to see if they made a mistake, but he assured me that my husband left work at 5 o'clock, sharp. You don't think he could be committing adultery, do you?
I don't know, but he is definitely keeping secrets from you. Just say the word, and I'll start telling him tonight.
That would be great, she told me. I promised her that I would email her if I discovered anything. She gave me his name and place of work. I will be referring to her husband as Michael. I got to his place of work at around 4 and parked in the driveway. I saw someone matching his picture leave the building at 5:07 and get into a car. I followed Michael and took several pictures. He went to a diner right after work and sat down. I walked in and sat in the corner and ordered food so that I wouldn't look too inconspicuous. I saw Michael speaking with a woman. I discreetly took pictures just in case, but that was not enough to prove adultery. He left the diner alone at around 7. I followed him until he turned into a small road that led into the woods. I knew that if I followed him in a car, he would notice me, so I parked my car at a nearby gas station and followed him on foot. It took a while to catch up because I was on foot, but at around 8:30, I saw his car parked outside of a remote house. I saw him step out of the house at around 10:30 and get back into his car. I knew that I couldn't keep tailing him since it was a long walk back to my car, so I went to the cabin. I walked up to the door and peeked inside and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I picked the lock on the front door and opened it. I knew there couldn't be an alarm system because that would increase the risk of his wife finding out about his little home away from home. I knew that I was breaking the law at this point, but playing fair never gets anyone far in life. I held my flashlight and searched the house. There was no light switch or ceiling fan. In fact, the house didn't even have any wall outlets or electricity-powered devices. There was no running water either. The only noteworthy things were an empty medicine cabinet, an empty wardrobe, 2 battery-powered fans, 2 battery-powered lamps, a sofa, 2 chairs, and a table. I took a few pictures and went home. I didn't want to call his wife until I was certain that he was loyal or until I found some hard evidence. I decided that I would continue my investigation the following day. I followed him again and saw him sitting down with the same girl from the day before. I didn't take any pictures this time, I just watched. When he left the bar and got into his car, the woman accompanied him. He was driving and he followed the same road that he followed the night before. I parked in the same lot and followed after them on foot. When I saw Michael's car parked outside of the same house, I approached the house. I put my ear to the door. I heard loud moaning. I looked through a window and saw that no one was in sight. I did, however, notice that the wardrobe I saw that previous day had been opened and there was a hidden door behind it. I picked the lock on the front door and quietly opened it. I looked inside the wardrobe and saw that there was a staircase leading down into a basement. I started recording and quietly crept over to the top of the staircase. I saw the woman, naked, bent over on a bed, and Michael, also naked, on his knees behind her. I pointed my camera at them and started to record them. I immediately noticed something peculiar, that the entire room, including the bed, was covered in plastic. I would have been more suspicious if I wasn't so focused on getting a good video. After a few seconds passed, I was about to turn off my camera and head home with my evidence until I saw Michael pull a carving knife from under the pillow in front of her. When I saw the knife, I was about to call out and stop him, but in less than a minute, Michael had rammed the knife into the woman's eye. Her screams were ear-shattering. It sounded like something straight out of Psycho. I knew I couldn't save the girl, so I kept recording. Michael held his left hand over her mouth to quiet her screams. He then got the knife and stabbed it into her neck. She tried to put her hand over the puncture to stop the bleeding, but Michael dropped the knife and held both of her arms. I noticed that she was trying to scream, but it was much more quiet and gargled than before. Blood shot out of her neck and painted the plastic crimson. At this point, I backed away and left the house, closing the door as quietly as possible. When I felt that I was at a safe distance from the house, I ran as fast as I could to my car. I got in and sped home. I arrived home at about 9:30 and kept replaying that video. I kept studying every detail, wondering what I could possibly tell his wife. The first thing I thought of doing was presenting my evidence to the police, but that seemed so boring. I spent a great portion of my life seeking thrill, and I may have finally found my chance. Maybe that is just the sleep deprivation talking, but I don't know. I'm having trouble sleeping, but I'm going to keep trying. Update. Before I go into the details of what happened yesterday, I would like to clear something up. I do own a gun, a black Taurus PT-92, which I usually keep on the inside pocket of my jacket. I did not have my gun with me when I went into the secret house because I didn't think that Michael would be dangerous, and if I was found, I didn't want to be armed. I would have most likely shot Michael and tried to save the girl. Now, for the story. I slept for a few hours following my original post, but I couldn't stop thinking about Maria. That poor girl is obviously sleeping next to this sick monster. I decided that I needed to investigate the secret room. I went to his workplace at around 11 a.m. and checked to see if his car was there. I saw his car and checked to make sure that it was the same license plate, which it was. I decided that this meant that it was safe to go check out the house. I drove out there and arrived a little bit before midday. I took a peek through the window and noticed nothing out of the ordinary, so I picked the lock and stepped inside. I opened the wardrobe and slid the back across. I pulled out my handgun and flashlight and began to investigate. The first thing I noticed was that all the plastic had been taken down. I searched under the pillow expecting to find a knife, but I didn't find anything. In fact, the entire room looked spotless. The only things I found in the room was the bed and a nightstand next to the bed with a lamp on it. I checked inside the drawers of the nightstand and all I found was a roll of paper towels in the top drawer. Once I thoroughly investigated the hidden room, I walked up the stairs and started to investigate the house one more time. I made sure to leave everything the same way that I found it and leave no trace that anyone had been there. After I finished my investigation, I decided that there was no way I could keep this from his wife. Every moment she stayed with him, she was in danger. I got back in my car and drove to the nearby gas station I had left my car at the previous 2 days. It was about 2 o'clock by this time, so I knew that Maria was still at work. I pulled out my phone and sent her an email. "Hey Maria, I made some great progress on that project we were working on. I have something that you definitely need to see. Please stop by my office right after work if you're able to." I wanted to be as vague as possible, just in case she happened to read it around anyone. I headed back to the office with all my evidence and notes. I had not decided if I was going to show her the part where he murdered that woman, but I was leaning towards the idea. As reluctant I was to get the police involved, I didn't want to end up endangering her any more than I already had. Just to be safe, I downloaded the video to my laptop, cut out the part that included the homicide, and saved the cut video to my laptop. I waited for her around 6. That's when I decided to call her. No answer. I went over to her place of work and didn't see her car in the parking lot. After calling her one more time and receiving no answer, I decided to drive over to the home address she gave me. I drove up to her house and saw 2 cars, hers and Michael's. It was about 7:30 at this time, so I decided to ring the doorbell. I rang it and waited for a minute or so, and Michael opened the door. I was shivering. "We aren't interested," Michael said. I was contemplating shooting him right there, but he held his left hand behind him. This meant that he was either holding a gun or pretending to. I didn't want to take any chances. "I'm a co-worker of Maria's. I urgently need to speak with her." "Whatever it is, I'm sure that it can wait until tomorrow morning." "It's very important that I speak to her right now." "Did you try calling her?" "I did." "And if she didn't answer, she probably doesn't want to speak to you right now. Ask her about it in person tomorrow, but right now, go home." He slammed the door in my face. I immediately began to worry for Maria's well-being. My first idea was to call the police, posing as Michael, complaining about harassment, but I quickly found flaws with that plan. The most important one being that, knowing what Michael is capable of, Maria might be dead before the police show up. I hopped the fence into their backyard. All I had on me was my pistol and my flashlight. I saw a pipe on the outside leading up to their bedroom window. I put my gun in my jacket pocket and held the flashlight with my teeth. I climbed the pipe, and when I reached the window, I held the flashlight and shined it through the window. I saw Maria, lying, motionless. I looked closer and saw blood near her mouth. I dropped the flashlight and pulled out my gun. I shot the lock that held the window shut and slid it open. I ran to the light switch and turned it on. Then I went over to Maria. After noticing blood near her ankle and some further inspection, I came to the realization that she was still alive and conscious. The only thing I noticed wrong with her, save for a few bruises, was a laceration on her Achilles tendon. At this point, it was obvious that he did not mean to kill Maria. He could have done that easily. He just wanted to occupy me while he made his escape. I took off my jacket and wrapped it around Maria's ankles to stop any bleeding. I held Maria's hand and told her to stay with me while I phoned the police.
911, what's your emergency?
"I need you to send police and paramedics here."
Of course. What's the problem?
"I'm with a woman who's been attacked by her husband. She's bleeding."
Is she conscious?
"Yes, she is."
May I please speak to her?
"Can you speak with the operator, Maria?" I asked. Maria opened her mouth. I thought that she was trying to say something, but she wanted to show me something. I took a look in her mouth to notice that it was bleeding and lacking a tongue. Oh, Christ! Maria pointed over to a nightstand. I looked and saw her severed tongue and a post-it note next to it. I hung up the phone, certain that the police and paramedics were well on their way, and walked over to the post-it note. "Your move" was written in pencil. I was thinking fast and decided to get rid of the note to prevent the police from reading it. I tore the note in half, then I tore those halves into halves. I then put the pieces in my mouth and after a few moments swallowed them. I returned to Maria and kept talking to her to make sure that she didn't lose consciousness. The police came and brought me in for questioning and took Maria to the hospital. I told the police the truth, but not the whole truth. I explained that I am a private investigator and that she hired me to see if her husband was cheating on her. I told them that I discovered that he was and sent her an email explaining that we needed to meet. When she didn't come to my office, I went over to her house to meet with her. He opened the door and wouldn't let me speak with her. I feared for her safety, so I broke in and found her that way. I neglected to tell them about the secret house and about the girl he killed. They let me go, but without my gun or my coat. They dropped me back at the house where they were conducting their investigation so that I could get my car. I drove over to the office where I could grab a spare flashlight. I asked a colleague of mine if he had an extra gun I could borrow for a few days. He told me that I could borrow his handgun, Beretta 8000, as long as I return it by the 8th. I thanked him and headed to a hotel so that I could spend the night. I couldn't make the mistake of underestimating him. I needed to play this thing safe. The only thing that I know right now is that I lost the biggest advantage that I had, which was his failure to know that I was investigating him. Tomorrow, I plan to head over to the hospital and check up on his wife. I have a head start on the police, meaning that if I work fast, I can catch him before they do. It's my move. Let the games begin. Update. I woke up a little earlier than usual yesterday. I kept rewatching the video in which Michael murdered that poor lass. If Maria could identify her, I might get a lead. I looked over the pictures I took the first day that I started following him and saved one with the girl's face onto my phone. The first thing I did was investigate the house in which Michael committed the murder. There's a slim chance of him being held up in there. I drove out to the house and noticed no cars. I picked the lock anyways and searched the house top to bottom. I found no traces of Michael or any clues that would help me. I decided that I needed to head over to the hospital and question Maria. The murdered girl seemed to be the only lead I had. When I got there, I asked to visit her, and when I got to her room, I saw her sitting up in a bed with a notepad and pen on the table beside her bed. I asked the nurse if we could have some alone time. "Is it okay with you?" the nurse asked Maria. Maria grabbed her pen and notepad and wrote, "Yes." The nurse walked out of the room, leaving us alone. "I sent you an email to meet me after work. Why didn't you show?" "I didn't see an email from you," she wrote down. "Does your husband have access to your email account?" She responded with, "I left my desktop logged into my email. He must have got it in that way." "He was cheating on you, by the way. I followed him and discovered him having sex with some woman." I pulled out the picture of the woman on my phone. "Have you ever seen this woman before?" She held my phone in her hands and examined the picture for about a minute. I was beginning to lose hope that she would recognize her at all, but she handed me the phone and picked up her notepad. "Several months ago, Michael forgot the lunch that I packed for him at home. I saw her in a cubicle. She must be one of her coworkers," she wrote. I didn't get a name, but it was a start. I knew that following this lead was the best shot I had at catching Michael. I thanked her and stood up, prepared to leave. Before I could turn and walk away, she grabbed my sleeve. I looked over to her, and she began to write, "Find Michael and bring him to justice. You will be paid." I nodded and left. I went over to Michael's place of work to question his employer. I asked to make an appointment with the manager, and a receptionist told me that he was available to speak with me. I was shown into a nice office in which I was able to speak with the manager. I'll be referring to the manager as Joseph. We greeted one another, and then I showed him the picture of the woman. "I'm a private investigator, and I was hired to find a missing person. This woman works here, correct?" Joseph looked a little uneasy. I understand that this question may have shocked him a little. He then replied, "Yes, she's employed here. I'm guessing that she hasn't been showing up to work these past few days, correct?" "Correct," he answered quickly. "Can you please tell me her name?" "The person who employed your services didn't tell you?" he pressed. "They don't know her name. She isn't the person that I was employed to find, but I think that she could lead me to find the person." "This sounds too odd for me. I'm afraid that you will need to go elsewhere for your information," Joseph told me. I pulled out a $50 bill from my pocket and placed it in front of me. "President Grant would like to know her name." He looked at the bill for a few seconds, then he told me her name. "I will be referring to this woman as Clarice." He reached for the $50 bill, but I placed my hand over it. "What type of car does she drive, and what is the license plate number?" I asked. "I don't know," he answered. "Look through your files. Figure it out." He turned to his desktop and began pulling up some files. After a few minutes, he told me the car and the plate. I figured that she would have left the car at the diner the night she was killed, but it was probably towed by now. I decided to check the diner first, just in case. After finding no cars that match this description, I checked online to see if any towing lots were storing any cars matching the description and license plate that I was given. Luckily, I found a lot a little over a mile away that had Clarice's car. I planned on searching the car for clues. I stopped by a sporting store and purchased a ski mask, then drove over to the lot and waited about an hour so that the sun was down and I could sneak in. During this hour, I was scouting the lot looking for an entry point, an exit point, and, of course, the car itself. I located all of these, put on the mask, and prepared to sneak in. I doubted that they would let me search the car without being the owner, even if I proved myself to be a private investigator. I located all three things and snuck in, quickly and quietly. I approached the car and crouched beside the passenger door. I unlocked the door using the slipknot method. For anyone who doesn't know, the slipknot method involves tying a loose knot in the middle of a long piece of string. The knot is slid between the car door and the door frame, placing around the lock and tightened. Once tightened, the string is to be brought up, rendering the car door unlocked. You can learn more about this method with a simple Google search. After I unlocked the door, I closed it and began looking for clues. Once I opened the glove compartment, I found a powered-off iPhone 6. I powered on the phone and saw a picture of Clarice as the lock screen. At first, I was confused as to why the phone was still in her car, but then it all began to make sense. Michael must have told her to leave it in her car so that no one could locate his little home away from home via GPS. I continued searching her car and found nothing noteworthy. I even popped the hood and the trunk just to make sure that there were no clues being missed. I came to the conclusion that her phone was my only lead. Clarice's phone had a passcode, so I couldn't get in. I did, however, have a coworker who was an expert at this sort of thing. I hastily snuck out of the lot and drove over to his house. He's sort of a loner, so I don't worry too much about catching him at a bad time. Michael most likely disposed of Clarice's body and is confident that nobody has found it. This meant that the possibility of him hiding in Clarice's house was present. Once I arrived at my friend's house, I explained to him that I was on a case and needed his help opening this phone. He invited me inside and started on the phone. He plugged the phone into some sort of device that helped him bypass the security. I'm not going to act like I understand what he was doing, but he managed to get into the phone within 10 minutes. He disabled the passcode security feature, which allowed me to use the phone at my leisure. I thanked him and got back to my car. When I opened Clarice's phone, the first thing I noticed was the wallpaper. The wallpaper was a picture of her and a man that I could not recognize. He was hugging her from the back, and they were kissing. I looked a little closer and noticed that they were wearing matching rings. I opened the Maps app and looked through her favorites. Luckily, there was a location named Home. I typed the location into my GPS and drove over. Once I neared the location, I parked around the corner and put on my ski mask. I opened Clarice's contacts and saw a contact saved as Home. I saved the number and devised a plan. I walked over to Clarice's house and stood across the street. I crouched next to a trash can and looked at the house with binoculars. I saw a car parked out front, but it didn't belong to Michael. The lights were turned on. I noticed that I had a clear view of the landline from the front window. I crossed the street and crouched down a few meters from the window and drew my gun. My plan was to call the landline, and if Michael went anywhere near it, I would shoot him dead. I turned off the safety and aimed near the landline. I pulled out my phone and called the landline. I could see it ringing through the window, but no one went to answer it. I called again, and still nothing. After calling a third time, I decided that I should investigate the house. I knew that someone was in the house, I just didn't know who. I walked up to the window and looked through. I saw a TV left turned on. I knew that if Michael was in the house, I had no time to waste. So I kicked the door right next to the lock with all my force. The door busted open. I held my gun and looked around. The first thing that I noticed was the awful smell. After a little investigating, I discovered the source of the smell. The man from Clarice's wallpaper was lying down on the floor, dead. He had his throat slit open, and he looked like he had been dead for several hours. I ran to the back of the house trying to see if Michael had tried to escape through the back door, but it was shut and locked. That's when I felt Clarice's phone vibrate. I checked it, and it said, "Michael." I answered. "Where are you?" I asked.
"You're smarter than you look. I was surprised that you were able to discover my little secret, but I'm more surprised that you tracked me down."
I haven't told anything about Clarice yet. If you turn yourself in, the only charge you're looking at is the assault charge.
Why would you keep my secret? That doesn't make any sense.
You and I are the only people in the world who know about that. Come to the police station, get yourself a lawyer. You still have a life. Don't throw it all away. He chuckled.
I'll take my chances. You're pretty smart. You made a great adversary. The only mistake you made was thinking that you're smarter than me.
With that, he hung up the phone. I heard a car start up out front. I ran to the living room trying to catch him before he escaped, but he was already driving off by the time he came into view. I aimed my gun, hoping to shoot his tires before he turned out of view, but then I smelled something. I smelled gas. I ran out of the house and sprinted full speed to my car. While I was sprinting, I heard an explosion behind me. I hopped into my car and drove over to the hotel I'm staying at. I got into my room and placed my things on my desk. I couldn't help thinking about the conversation we had. I kept replaying it over and over in my mind. I couldn't help thinking about what he said, and I knew that there was some truth to it. There's no doubt that I underestimated him. I didn't expect him to be as patient, crafty, or astute as he turned out to be. Despite all the uncertainties I have, I'm certain that my situation just got much more dire. Underestimating him is not a mistake that I plan on making again. Update. I barely got any sleep following my last update. I had way too much on my mind. As soon as I woke up, I gathered my things and drove out to the house. I felt that Michael was running out of options, and he might be hiding out there. I prayed that he would be there, or at least had been there following our previous encounter. If he'd gone there, even for a few minutes, maybe a clue could lead me to where he's run off to. When I got there, I noticed the car that Michael escaped with parked outside the house. I grinned. I crept over to the house window and saw the plates looked completely normal with no sign of Michael. I picked the lock and crept inside. I looked around for Michael and didn't see him, so I decided to investigate the secret room. I held my gun in my right hand and placed my left hand on the door. I slid the door open and pulled out my flashlight, held up my gun, and looked for any sign of Michael. He wasn't in the house, but I needed to look for clues. If Michael had believed me about not talking to the police about Clarice, he would most likely be here. This means that he must think that I lied. I doubted that he would be returning, so my best bet was to turn this place inside out looking for something that he left behind. No criminal is perfect, and if he thinks that I'm dead, maybe he let his guard down and made a mistake. I decided to check the car first and found nothing noteworthy until I popped the hood. I looked closely, examining the engine to find a phone carefully placed beside it. I pulled it out only to see that it was broken beyond use, but not beyond salvaging the data. I was eager to call up that friend I mentioned in the previous update, but I decided to investigate the house first. I investigated the house more thoroughly than I ever had before. I checked pillowcases, between mattresses, under furniture. I didn't find anything. I decided to take the broken phone over to my friend and see if there was anything he could do. I hopped back into my car and sped over to his house. When I got there, he let me come inside and he began to get to work. He opened up the phone and pulled out the SIM card. He placed the card into another phone and plugged it into the same machine from the previous update. After a short wait, he handed me the phone with the passcode disabled. I thanked him profusely and checked everything I could think of. I noticed several calls being made to the same number. The number was saved under a contact name, but I'll be referring to the contact as Henry. This Henry guy was my only lead, but I don't know how to find him. I looked through Clarice's contacts and noticed that he was not a contact on her phone. I looked through the messages that Michael had with Henry, and they all seemed purposely vague. However, one message stood out. It was sent late last night, after the phone call I had with Michael. The message read, "Need shelter, will call." This was most likely sent right before Michael broke his cell phone. I smirked. I knew that finding Henry would lead me to find Michael, but how could I find Henry? I texted Maria and explained that I need to come by. She was staying at a hotel so that Michael would not know her location. Once I got to Maria's hotel room, I sat down with her and showed her the evidence that I had found. I asked her if she knew who Henry was and if she knew where I could find him. She told me that Henry was a friend of Michael's who used to work with him several years ago. She told me the location that he worked at, but warned me that it is unlikely that he's still working there. I thanked her and went to investigate anyway. It isn't like I have much of a choice. I went over to the location that she gave me and asked to speak with the manager. I'll be calling the manager Dave. Dave came to me and asked what he could help me with. "May we talk in private?" I asked. "Regarding what?" "I'm a private investigator and I think you will be able to help me with an investigation that I'm currently conducting." He brought me to an isolated room and asked me what it is that I needed. "I need to track down someone who is or was employed here." I told Dave the Henry's first and last name, as well as the year he used to work here. "I know a lot of people, and I'm not very good with faces, but I won't ever forget Henry." "Does he still work here?" I asked.
He did until a couple months back. He left though, got a job at a building not too far from here,
he explained. "Do you remember which building?"
Not off the top of my head, but I can check.
After some clicking around on his desktop, he gave me the address of the building that he was working at. He also showed me his picture and told me the car he used to drive. And I pray that he still drove the same car. I headed over to the building and arrived around 4:30. I sat in my car looking for anyone who looked similar to the picture to approach the car. At around 5:25, I spotted him. I carefully tailed him, making sure that he didn't notice me. He entered some suburban neighborhood before parking at a house. I took several pictures and watched from afar with binoculars. I sat in my car for a few minutes trying to decide the best course of action. After a few minutes, I decided that this game has gone on long enough. I told myself that I would kick the door down and shoot Michael in the head. I put on my ski mask, got out of the car, walked up to the front door, and kicked it right in. It flew open, and I walked in with my gun drawn and safety off. I took a few steps in and saw Henry, but not Michael. I pointed my gun at Henry. "Where is he?" I shouted. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. He sounded horrified. I walked up to him and grabbed him by his throat. "I'm not fucking around," I shouted. "Okay, he came here late last night and crashed. He left in the morning, I swear." "Where did he—" My question was interrupted by a noise. I heard footsteps coming from the front entrance. I grabbed Henry and held my gun to his head. I held him in front of me to block any bullets from hitting me. I knew that it was Michael, and I aimed my gun waiting for him to show himself. When I saw his silhouette, I shot a bullet, but all it hit was the wall. The footsteps stopped, and it was dead silent. Then, I heard his voice.
"You're persistent,"
he said coolly. "Show yourself, or Henry dies," I threatened.
"So, you can open fire on me?" "I don't care if he dies."
At this point, Henry started panicking. He promised me that Michael left that morning and that he had nothing to do with this. I believed him too. Michael must have scouted this place all day checking if I would come. "Shut up!" I yelled at Henry. I turned my attention to Michael. "I won't shoot if you step out now and drop your gun."
"I was hoping to get the drop on you. I thought it would all end tonight. I'm sure that now the police are coming, and I certainly can't escape before they arrive if I stay any longer. So I must go now."
As soon as he finished that sentence, he leaned his hand over the wall and shot a bullet that hit Henry right in the stomach. Henry started to scream in pain. My initial thought was that the shot was meant for me, but then I realized that he didn't want to leave a loose end hanging around. Henry fell backwards, staggering me. I dropped his body and ran to the window. I looked out to see Michael driving away in a car that I hadn't seen before. I shot my gun at his tires, but he was too far away and moving too fast for me to actually hit him. I knew that he slipped away once more, so I turned my attention to Henry. "Where is he going?" I asked. "Tell me." Henry just looked at me with his eyes wide open. I couldn't tell if he was too shocked to speak or in too much pain, but we both knew that he was going to die. I searched him, but all he had on him was his cell phone and his keys. I knew that there was too much evidence placing me here, so I knew that I couldn't run. I determined that I had less than 10 minutes until the police arrived, so I took off my ski mask and hauled ass to Henry's car. I searched for anything that could possibly be useful. All I found was a notebook, so I ran over to my car. I opened up my car and placed his notebook, keys, and cell phone in my glove compartment, as well as my ski mask. I shut the glove compartment and ran back to the house and waited for the police. While I was waiting, I put my hands over Henry's wounds to stop the bleeding. I wasn't actually trying to save him. I knew that he was beyond saving, but I needed a story to tell the police. When the police arrived, they questioned me at the scene. I told them that Henry had hired me to do a background check on one of his coworkers. I said that I was meeting with him in order to discuss my findings, but Michael showed up, kicked down the front door, and tried to shoot me but missed and hit Henry instead. I shot a bullet back at him but missed, so he took off. I told them that I went to the window to see him speeding off and try to shoot his tires. This story was somewhat believable since Michael was a wanted man, and I was at his house the night that he went on the run. The police asked me why I didn't call them. I told them that I was too occupied trying to stop Henry's bleeding and was confident that a neighbor had heard the gunshots and called them for sure. After some extensive questioning, the police decided that the crime scene seemed to match my story. They let me go but warned me that they would contact me if anything turned up. They did, however, take my gun as evidence again. This wasn't too much of a problem since I was able to get my old gun back since they had concluded that investigation. By the time I was free to go, it was late at night, so I went back to my hotel room. I took my new evidence up to the room and placed it all down on my desk. I was praying that there was a lead buried somewhere in here. I was so angry that I couldn't anticipate that trap, but I was more angry that I let him slip through my fingers again. Despite all of this, I swear, the next time me and Michael meet, it will be the last. I'm either going to kill that prick, or I'm going to die trying. Update. I woke up and I knew that I needed to start my hunt. If Michael was smart, which I know he is, he would be leaving town before the heat with the police gets any hotter. I checked the notebook and cell phone I got from Henry. The cell phone didn't have a SIM card at all, so there was nothing on it that I could use to find Michael. The notebook had a few pages ripped out, so I got a pen and scratched across the page. I could see the previous page read, Michael, black Toyota Camry, and then a license plate number. I saw Michael escaped in a black Toyota Camry, so I knew that this information could be trusted. I thought a lot about Michael shooting Henry. It seems that he's trying to eliminate anyone who could give me unwanted information. I immediately thought about Maria and knew that he might come for her sooner or later. I immediately headed over to Maria's hotel room. She was my last hope for getting the drop on Michael. I knew that if Michael knew where she was, he would try to come and kill her, so I just needed to trick him into getting to her. As soon as I got to her hotel room, I asked if she had seen Michael following her attack. No, she wrote down. Have you left the hotel since you checked in? She circled the word no. I looked around the room to make sure there weren't any bugs. This could very well be my last shot at catching Michael, and it's ruined if he sees it coming. I had an idea. I asked if she had her keys with her. She wrote down that they were at her house. Her car has been parked at her house ever since Michael attacked her. Maybe Michael put a GPS tracker on it before his attack. It seemed like a long shot at first, but it would make sense knowing how crafty he'd been. Maria gave me her house keys and told me the password to her burglar alarm. I drove to Maria's house and opened the door. I knew that there was a close to no chance that Michael had been hiding out here, but I drew my gun anyway and checked every corner. After satisfying my paranoia, I got Maria's keys from the key rack. First, I checked under the car. No tracker. Then, I checked the car's interior. Still, no tracker. When I popped the hood and checked there, I began to smile from ear to ear. Right next to the engine was a tracker. I closed up the hood, took the keys, and drove over to Maria's place. I needed her help if I wanted to bait Michael out into the open. I drove back over to her hotel room and gave her the keys. I explained to her that I needed her help in order to get Michael out into the open. I asked her to drive her car out to the diner where I followed him the first night and eat something. I gave her directions to Michael's secret house and told her to drive there after she finished her food. She seemed frightened, but I promised that nothing would happen to her. I drove her over to her house and gave her the keys. I told her to wait 10 minutes and text me if anything happens. I then drove out to the diner and parked my rental car at a pharmacy across the street and watched with binoculars. Maria got there a little over 10 minutes after I parked, and I was discreetly watching from across the street. About 20 minutes after Maria arrived, I saw Michael's car drive into the diner's parking lot and park. I was scared that Maria would make a mistake and lead on that it was a trap, but I needed to trust her. I parked my rental car at a gas station I had mentioned in previous updates and walked into the woods. I found a nice area so that I could see the house and the path leading up to it. I waited for a little over an hour, just waiting for them to arrive, but then I saw Maria's car driving down the path. At first, I couldn't see Michael's car, but after a short wait, I saw his car about 20 meters away from the house. Maria had turned off the car, stepped out with her crutches, moved over to the door, and started fiddling with the doorknob. Michael's car stopped. He got out and began walking towards the house. I started moving to get closer so I could take a clear shot. When I felt confident, I took the safety off my gun and took my aim. He just kept walking. I held my breath and counted to 3 in my head. 1, 2, 3. I pulled the trigger. Time itself seemed to slow down. After what had been a fraction of a second but had felt like eons, I saw the bullet hit him in the back. He fell to the floor, shouting in pain. I walked over to him. What I saw was him reach into his jacket, but I shot him in the shoulder. I reached into his jacket and grabbed a handgun from a shirt pocket. I took a few steps back and dropped his gun at my feet. We looked at each other silently for a moment. Then he spoke.
I guess you win.
I guess I win.
You gonna kill me or turn me in?
I'm going to kill you.
Well,
What are you waiting for? I hope you weren't expecting me to beg.
I wasn't.
Then get on with it,
he said with a straight face. I looked at him for a moment, then said, I guess I am smarter than you. His straight face turned into a scowl. He looked enraged. I aimed my gun and shot him in the forehead. His body dropped to the floor, motionless. I walked over to Maria and told her to go back to her hotel room. She nodded her head and drove off. I went over to Michael's body and just examined him for a moment. I closed his still open eyes and loaded him into the back seat of his car. I then picked up the shell casings that my gun had left. I pulled off Michael's shirt and stuffed the end of it into the gas tank. I pulled out my lighter and lit the other end on fire. I started walking back towards the car I rented and heard the explosion from behind me. I decided to keep my rental car for today and return it tomorrow. So I drove over to the diner that I followed Michael the first day and got some dinner. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I don't think I'll stop anytime soon. I drove back to my hotel room to spend my last night there. I may post another update if something of interest happens, but for now, I won. This story was told to me by one of my good friends who's of Navajo descent on her father's side. It happened several years ago when she was spending the last 2 weeks of summer visiting relatives on a reservation in New Mexico, and is by far one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. My friend, Jessie, was 12 at the time and playing outside with her cousins. They were tossing a frisbee around and one of the younger kids threw it too hard. It flew over the fence and was swallowed up by the small grove of parched burk oak trees. Jessie, being the eldest, went to retrieve it, leaving her 11-year-old cousin Ellie in charge until she got back. The sun was setting, lighting up the sky in brilliant shades of orange as Jessie made her way over to the grove. After some poking around, she found the frisbee caught in one of the tree's branches. As she climbed, she began to sing an old Navajo song, but paused when her body suddenly went cold. That's exactly how Jessie described it to me. Cold, as if she'd been dunked in ice water. You know that annoying, scary story cliche, a feeling like you're being watched? Well, it's only cliche because it's true. Jessie could feel a pair of eyes following her even when she looked around and saw nothing. Seriously creeped out, she grabbed the frisbee and ran back to her grandmother's house just in time to see the old woman step onto the porch and call for the children to come inside. The true horror didn't start until 7 hours later. Jessie, her cousin Ellie, and Ellie's little sister Clara were asleep in their grandmother's guest room when Jessie woke up to the strangest sound she'd ever heard. She described it to me as a cross between radio static and the noise an old movie reel makes. At first, it sounded distant, but after a minute or two, Jessie realized it was getting closer. Beside her, Ellie rolled over and muttered, "What is that?" "Don't know," Jessie whispered. The girls waited, holding their collective breath. By now, the sound was right outside the window, and Jessie realized it was singing. At this point in her retelling of the story, Jessie went white and began glancing over her shoulder. She told me the song was the exact same one she'd been singing in the tree grove earlier. It sounded so wrong, she said, rubbing her arms as if a cold breeze had rushed by her. Remember when we listened to that clip of the very first recording of a human voice? How weird it sounded. When I nodded, Jessie added, "It was like that, but a little clearer. Somehow, that made it even worse." Jessie and Ellie were both terrified, while Clara, unaware, slept on. Through the thin blue curtain over the window, they could see the dark shadow of something peering in at them. To this day, Jessie can't explain what motivated her to get up and see for herself since she was scared shitless. Ignoring Ellie's protests, she slid out of the bed and walked across the room on shaky legs. As soon as she drew back the curtain, she regretted her decision. Staring back at her was the most horrifying creature she'd ever seen. It had the head of an emaciated deer with antlers like dead tree branches and eyes so black they seemed to absorb the faint silver moonlight. It had a scrawny humanoid body with abnormally long arms and legs, and as Jessie stood there, caught in its hideous gaze, it raised a claw hand and scratched at the window with a horrible screeching sound that made Jessie's skin crawl. It was Ellie's scream that jolted Jessie out of her terrified stupor. She stumbled back from the window and landed on the carpet floor. Clara woke up and began screaming too. Then their grandmother ran in and turned on the light. The thing at the window had vanished, leaving behind 3 long scratches in the glass and 3 terrified little girls. Jessie's grandmother managed to calm the hysterical children enough so they could tell her what happened. As she listened, her age-weathered face became progressively paler. She hustled the girls downstairs to the living room and made a bed for them on the couch. She then sat by them all night, and whenever one of them asked her what was going on, the old woman simply shook her head. Needless to say, Jessie and her cousins didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jessie's grandmother announced that everyone was to stay inside that day. No arguments. She looked so shaken, nobody dared to protest. Around noon, she called for a medicine woman to come and bless the home. Later, after the woman left, Jessie marched into the kitchen where her grandmother was loading the dishwasher. "Tell me what that thing was," she said bluntly. Her grandmother sighed and motioned for Jessie to sit down. "You've heard the legend of the Skinwalkers, yes?" Jessie frowned and nodded, vaguely recalling the story. "So, that was a skinwalker?" Her grandmother nodded, yes. "Grandma," said Jessie as the light dawned, "I think it overheard me singing in the tree grove yesterday." Her grandmother's dark eyes narrowed. "Why do you say that?" "Because it was singing that same song. You know, the lullaby you used to sing to me when I was little." Her grandmother was silent for a long time before whispering, "You are a very lucky girl, Jessica, but luck has its limits. From now on, you must be more careful." The look in the old woman's eyes as she spoke those words still haunts Jessie to this day. As I said earlier, this was years ago, 7 to be specific. Jessie has returned to the reservation many times, each without incident, but she's never set foot on that tree grove again, and probably never will. Jessie's grandmother died this past March at the age of 87, and Jessie later moved in with her aunt for the summer so she could help clean up the old house which the family was going to rent out. She'd been there for about a week when I went down there to visit her. On my first night, we sat on the porch and drank some beers, and I found my eyes drifting towards the tree grove. "So that's where it all happened." Jessie shuddered and nodded. "Yup, tomorrow I'm taking you to the medicine woman and have her bless you. Is that really necessary?" The look Jessie gave me nearly turned me to stone. "You think nothing will happen to you because you're white, but when you're in Navajo territory, you're in Skinwalker territory. Take caution." I nodded yes. That night, I swore I heard radio static outside the house. When I brought it up to Jessie the next morning, she didn't speak, but grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the medicine woman, where I was blessed. Nothing happened for the rest of the trip, and I went back to the city unscathed. I didn't post this here with the intention of teaching a moral, but I suppose if there is something to be learned from the story of the singing Skinwalker, it's that there are things out there we can't explain. The look in Jessie's eyes when she recounted her experience told me everything I needed to know. What she saw truly horrified her, and all I can say is I'm grateful I didn't have to go through it myself. Thank you so much for watching. Consider joining the Dark Circle on Patreon. If you donate $1 a month, you can get every story narration in MP3 format amongst other things. Also, feel free to support the channel by checking out the Teespring store or ordering my book. Thank you so much for your support, and don't forget to keep it creepy.